Welcome to the Jerome McClain Show. I'm your host, Jerome McClain, and let's get into our episode.
Intelligentsia, the endem of sarcasm, the nutty professor, to your whack-ass marmalade. It's T-Bone from T-Bone and Chick Brew in the morning. Now available in podcast format. Simply search for the T-Bone and Chick Brew podcast, available wherever fine podcasts are sold.
Welcome to the Jerome McClain Show. I'm your host, Jerome McClain. Independent media that won't reinforce tribalism. We have one planet. Nobody is leaving. Let us reason together. Is there an addiction that is plaguing America? That's the question we're going to be answering today. Let's get into the episode. Quote of the day: until I have done something for humanity, you should be ashamed to die. If you have not done something for humanity, you ought to be ashamed to die. Let's get to the episode.
The idea that if you build a wall, jobs are coming back for real. Does anybody understand economics at all? Do you actually think that, like, the nation's capitalists are sitting around just waiting? They're like, holy, I hope they don't figure out that they could just build a wall. Do you actually think the capitalists are like, we've got them, we've been screwing them for years, we haven't been paying them right, we've been, not giving them benefits, but if they build that wall, we're going to have to give them all a raise. Really? You think that's how it works? You build the wall and then all of a sudden the jobs come back? No, the wall doesn't stop capital from moving. Neither does a tweet, by the way. An angry tweet doesn't actually cause a company to change its plans. If you think that an angry tweet makes a multinational corporation decide, oh, holy hell, well, he's mad at me on Twitter, so I guess we'll just keep the jobs here. You know nothing about economics at all, right? A tweet's not going to change. Neither is a wall going to change capital mobilization. Capital's always going to be free to cross borders. Goods are always going to be free to cross borders in search of the highest price, capital in search of the highest return. The only thing a wall does is chain labor to its country of origin. And if you have a policy that chains labor to its country of origin but allows capital to move wherever the hell it wants, so I can still move my company south of the border, I can still move to Sri Lanka to take advantage of less labor protection, environmental protection, etc. All you've done is tilt the game against labor permanently, and not just labor south of the border, but labor north of the border as well. Labor in this country would be far better off to have more folks here who were fighting for justice, who were fighting for better wages, who were fighting for better benefits, not something like a wall or a deportation policy that would limit the ability of those folks to mobilize for radical change. That is not a pro-worker policy, but it is very much in keeping with the mentality that says to those non-rich white folks, your problems are those people. And as long as we can keep folks thinking that, we're not dealing with the real problems.
3/5 of a human being. That is not ancient history. That is the math still built into the system that put Donald Trump in the White House. What Tim Wise is about to say next got him called one of the most dangerous speakers in America. He is going to call Trump a walking, talking, breathing opioid for white people. He is going to take apart stop and frisk with actual numbers. 4.5 million stops. 97% of people had not done a single thing. He is going to expose a leaked audio tape where a top Republican strategist admitted they replaced the N-word with states' rights and welfare to keep winning elections. He is going to prove with government crime data that everything Trump said about Black communities was a lie. Subscribe and turn on notifications. This is a speech they try to keep buried. Watch this.
As long as we can keep people focused on that. See, that's the divide and conquer mentality that has existed for generations. There is nothing new about it. And we've been falling for it for hundreds of years to our own detriment. So we have to be prepared to actually deal with that. What does that mean? What does it mean to not know that history? See, it's not just a history lesson, right? It also helps to explain what's going on right now. History, sometimes we don't get why it's relevant. You know, we sit in classes learning history and we think like, why do I need to know this stuff? And I understand because a lot of times it's taught in a very sterile kind of way and sort of boring way. And it's like, why do I need to know this? Right? Why is this important? Why can't we just ignore this? Well, a lot of reasons why you can't. Just as one little point, because, you know, white folks, we love to do this, right? White folks, particularly around race, we like to say things like, why can't black people just get over it? Like, slavery was a long time ago. Right? Why can't they just move on? Well, this is sort of precious coming from people who set off fireworks every July 4th. Because that's some old too, right? Like Independence Day, that didn't happen last week, right? We didn't break away from the British last Thursday. That's some old, but we're still celebrating that. So when it's stuff that makes us feel good, we love it. When it's stuff that makes us feel better than others, superior, like we're the greatest people in the greatest country ever struck off in the forehead of God Almighty, oh, we'll remember that forever. We just don't like the stuff that brings us up a little short, makes us look a little less than superior, maybe not quite as good as we'd like to believe. If you don't understand why the past affects the present, particularly around issues like enslavement, putting aside the inheritance of wealth and the lack thereof, part of which is certainly an explanation for why currently the median white wealth is 15 times the median African-American wealth and 11 to 12 times the median Latino wealth. Certainly that has something to do with history, who had access to resources and who didn't. But putting aside that, let's just understand something. The only reason Donald Trump is president right now is because of a little thing called the Electoral College, which was put in place by folks. See, we got this revisionist history that we've been spinning for the last couple of months about the Electoral College. Oh, you know, it was put in there to prevent tyranny. For real, you think? Do you really think that? Because I don't think that. Now, that might have been one of the things that folks were concerned about, but it was also put in because folks like the folks in Virginia, in the bigger slaveholding states, right, didn't want direct democracy or anything even remotely like it because it would have hurt them because so much of their population was not enfranchised, right? So much of their population in some areas, 40% or over half of the people in some of those slaveholding states were what? Disenfranchised, counted as 3/5 of a human being, not considered people. And if you had anything remotely resembling direct democracy, those states would have been harmed by that. So in fact, the Electoral College was in part a compromise with slaveholding states, states who were dependent upon enslavement as a mechanism of economic development so as to improve their political position vis-a-vis non-slaveholding states.
This is why I tell people a lot of times I don't get shocked when things happen because I'm a student of history. So I don't have to study the markets. I can know history trends to know exactly where to save money, when not to do it, et cetera, et cetera. But here's something that I want people to remember. When you think about history, I want you to break the word down and think of just his story. And so when you see somebody quoting history, listen to them, learn from them, and then think that was his story. Now, what are the stories of all the other people that he named? And go see, listen to them. I think it's very important if we want to end this cultural divide to learn from the source. You know, we are anti-tribalism here. But listen to some of the people that they quote. Ask them, for some books and then some resources, right? And then go look at some of the names of the other people that they named. Look at what they thought about the facts. I always say you have to pay attention to what people do, not so much to what people say. So, for example, if on one side of our mouths, it's very normal to say, if you don't know your history, you'll be doomed to repeat it. And then when it's convenient, we'll say, why don't you just get over it? Well, I can't just get over it because you just told me that if I don't know my history, I'm doomed to repeat it. So if I know my history and I start to see trends that look like something that looks over here, then I'll be called paranoid. Warmongering, yada, yada, yada. And so a lot of times you have to see like what they mean by know your history. Sometimes people are speaking in code and they're saying, know my history. Yours is a lie. And the whole thing is, I always want people to think about the way we tell stories. Imagine if you and your wife. So in this condition, and we're going to talk about a nuclear family, and you went to church, and at your church, when you got there, your pastor wasn't there. There was a pastor from Chicago visiting, and the way the wife tells the story can be very different than the way the husband tells the story. A husband is gonna get a call.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Has anybody ever told you you were over opinionated? How about this one? You can talk about everything you like, but don't talk about religion. Don't talk about faith. Don't talk about politics. My name is Jerome McClain, host of Jerome McClain Show, and I want to introduce you to a show called Over Opinionated with my friend from Southwest Virginia, Josh Scott. Josh has always been told he has been over-opinionated. He always tried to hold back these opinions, but he tried to back them up when he had to say something with facts and logic. Since he's grown up in many ways, he had to change a lot of his views and his opinions, as a lot of people should. He's not a millionaire from Fox News or CNN. He's just a hard-working, blue-collar type of guy. Give Josh Scott a shot at Over Opinionated with Josh Scott. You can find him on patreon.com/overopinionated at 679. You can also check him out on Twitter at NRV_guy79. Over Opinionated with Josh Scott. Why, he is this soft-spoken guy telling you the truth. We talk about a lot of serious topics on this show. One very serious topic is women's health. One company that stood out to me was vslay.com, because the owner is very transparent about her own struggles in the women's health department and has great customer service, great deals, and frequent sales. You can check her out, her great customer service, products about women's health, and frequent sales at www.vslay.com. That is www.vslay.com.
Bing, bing, bing. Hey man, how was service today? Oh, good. What Rev say? Rev wasn't there. What who did it? You know, some dude from Chicago. That's the way a guy would tell a story. This is the way a woman would tell the story. Ring, ring, ring. Hey there. Hey, girl, you look so good today in church. Dude, they was kicking it today, and that pastor from da-da-da-da, and the music was good, and you ask Murphy, the mighty clouds of joy. Same experience, but the way they tell the story is vastly different. Imagine the story we hear all the time about Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson is one of my favorite presidents. I like John Meacham's book, The Art of Power, of Thomas Jefferson, if anybody's interested. Thomas Jefferson wrote a lot of stuff about himself in his own biography, or autobiography. Now imagine what that would sound like if Mrs. Jefferson had written his book, and his wife would have a very different view of Thomas Jefferson than he had of himself. Now let's take this even further. We now know that Thomas Jefferson regularly had sex with the slaves. The famous known one is Sally Hemings. What would she have to say if she was the official Thomas Jefferson biographer? Think about that when we think about history. History is always set in time by the people who won the wars, and therefore they feel like they get to shape the narrative. But that is not always the truth, or not always the entire truth.
So if you don't understand how slavery, because this is the point, right? Even if you don't think racism was key to Donald Trump's own campaign, which, suggests to me that you might have been asleep for the last several months, even if you believe that, understand that racism in the 1700s White supremacy embedded in the structure of the country, at the founding of the country, is most definitely implicated in his election, because without the obeisance to the Electoral College, without that compromise, we know he would not be president right now. So that is why we have to think about the past. And that is why the past affects the present. See, inertia is not just a property of the physical universe. It is also a property of the socioeconomic and the political universe that we have to address. And it's important for us to address that as a systemic matter. See, this is the other problem. We talk about race and racism, right? That I think we got to move through if we're going to be effective. Because ever since the election, it's been very, it's easy, I suppose, for people to, and they ask me this a lot, and you've probably, sort of come up upon these kind of conversations where people are, do you think Donald Trump's a racist? Donald Trump a racist? Are all of his supporters racist? All of these are the wrong questions, right? It isn't really about whether he's a racist or whether his supporters are racist or not. I would never, first of all, assume that all of anybody's supporters are anything, right? I mean, that would just be ignorant. I would never say like, oh, the only reason you would ever vote for Donald Trump is because you're a bigot. Look, not only are not all of Donald Trump's supporters racist, not all of Hillary Clinton's aren't racist. Let's be clear about that. And in fact, in 2008, I remember there were polls that came out like a month before the election, right? Where something like 28% of white Democrats who said, and I assume they were telling the truth, that they were going to vote for Barack Obama in a month or 6 weeks or whatever it was. 28% of white Democrats 6 weeks out from the election said, yeah, I'm going to vote for that guy. But they acknowledged to pollsters that they still believed at least one, if not several, racist stereotypes of black people to be true. So what does that mean, right? It means like, yeah, I don't like a lot of them, but that one's okay. Right? It's racism 2.0, but it's some updated software, but it's running on the old mainframe. It's some of the same old, you just sort of repurposed it, repackaged it. But if I believe that the larger group is dysfunctional, the fact that I carve out an exception for one guy, right, or a handful of people doesn't change it. It's still racist. So this isn't about like, oh, this person is awful and this person is great, and these people are awful and these people are great. We're all a mix of awful and great. It's the reality, right? We've all been conditioned to be racist and to be sexist and to be classist and all of this stuff, right? We've been hit with that stuff ever since we were kids. So none of us are completely free from that. That's the idea that we can divide ourselves into like the racist and the unracist is just nonsense, right? It's not about that. It's like, if we ask if Donald Trump is a racist, it's sort of like asking if a drug dealer is also an addict. I don't know. And I don't care, right? It's like with Donald Trump, it's like, I don't know if he gets high on his own supply, but I know what he's selling, right? So at some point, whether or not he's a racist, if he's actually manipulating on the basis of race, if he's using race and racial resentment and racial anxiety in order to get elected, the action is racist. It's not about somebody's core character. And this is something that the right has been manipulating for a very long time. Go back to 1981. There's a audio recording. You can Google this and listen to it yourself. 1981, Lee Atwater, who was for a long time, probably before Karl Rove, the most prominent conservative Republican consultant of the modern era. He had worked for Reagan. He worked for George H.W. Bush. He worked for all the sort of leading conservative Republican candidates through the 80s and into the 90s. He has since died of cancer. But before all of that, before he got sick, when he was still very much embedded in Republican conservative politics, 1981, there's an audio tape of him where he actually admits this as a strategy, right? He actually is on the tape saying, listen, back in the 1950s, you could say, and, it's the N word. I'm not going to say it. He says it in the tape like 3 times. He says it over and over and over again. And then he says, but by the 60s, late 60s, you can't say that word anymore. It gets you in trouble. So you start using other words like states' rights and crime and welfare, right? And taxes. Right. And he says, and now you're getting so abstract, it sounds like it's all just about economics. But the real purpose and the point here is that black people get hurt worse than white people. So he's admitting this isn't me saying this about right wing folks. It's not me saying like that's what they're doing. right, saying this is what they're doing. It's the guy who's actually originated the theory and the practice who's saying, yeah, this is that we do. We just make up words and make up concepts, and we sucker people with these ideas to actually hurt black folks. That is what we do. Now, Lee Atwater apologized for some of that before he died. Other folks have not. They keep doing it, right? And so when Donald Trump gets up and said, now see, the difference, right, is that, like, there's a difference because Atwater was all about the dog whistle and Trump is like about the bullhorn, right? Like the dog whistle is you use coded language, but Trump was just like, screw it. Mexicans are rapists, right? And we're going to stop Muslims. He didn't really learn all Atwater's lessons. Like Atwater would have been like, dude, just like, could we talk a minute? Like, you're not really doing this right. Like you need to pull back. But by the end of the campaign, he was learning, right? He would talk about when he would address black folks, right? Of course, he never actually addressed black folks. He would go into white suburbs around black cities and talk to white people about black people. So he went to the suburbs of Milwaukee and had an all-white audience where he talked about the inner city, which is just interesting phrase, right? Because we haven't used that phrase to describe urban space in like 25 years. So he's still stuck in a mentality of, 25 to 30 years ago. He's like, the inner city is full of carnage and it's falling apart. Everything's terrible. You can't walk out the street without getting shot. Now, at the time, remember, everybody said, oh, you know what he's trying to do? He's trying to signal to people that he really cares about the black folks. He's trying to signal to those suburban white folks who might want to vote for him, but they're sort of like, oh, I think he's racist, that he's not because he cares about the black. That wasn't what he was doing, right? What he was doing by reminding white folks about how dangerous and dysfunctional and pathological and horrible black folks in the city were, was he was reinforcing their stereotypes and saying to them, I'm the one that can solve this problem. He wasn't signaling concern for those communities. He was and he was lying. He was lying because, in fact, violent crime in this country, including in black communities, is roughly half of what it was in the early 90s. That is a fact. And you can look it up and you can argue with him and he will ignore it because facts are fungible to him. And yes, there's been an uptick in the last 2 years in about half of the large metropolitan areas, but the other half, there's been no increase or even a decline in violent crime. Overall, violent crime down. Violent crime even in Chicago, a third below what it was in the early 90s. Violent crime in Los Angeles, 40% below what it was in the early 1990s, or 50% below. Crime in Washington, D.C. at a level it hasn't been seen since 1965. Black male homicide rates lower today than they were in 1950. Now that is what is factual, but we don't want to know about that because we want to paint certain communities as inherently dysfunctional, out of control, filled with carnage, because then we can turn our will over to the great man who can solve all those problems. How? Because he says we're going to do stop and frisk. We're going to turn the police loose, just like we did in New York because it worked so well. Stop and frisk, he says, worked so well in New York. Did it really? No, it didn't work. First of all, it's unconstitutional as hell. That's why it was thrown out. But more importantly, it didn't work at all. 88% of the people that were stopped were people of color, right? And only 6% of the people stopped even got a citation for jaywalking, right? 94% of the time, they hadn't done anything. 6% of the time, they got a citation for something, usually a very minor offense. Half of those got thrown out in court because there wasn't enough evidence to sustain the charge. So ultimately, 97% of the people stopped, and we're talking millions of people over a 14, 15-year period, hadn't done anything. But Donald Trump says it worked fabulously. Now, that fabulous is too big a word. He said it worked wonderfully. It was awesome. It was amazing. It was great. It was fantastic. It was the best. I mean, there's a thesaurus. It has other words. I'm sure there's one in the Oval Office. Right? He says, it was great. It worked wonderful. It didn't work because hardly anyone was guilty of anything. The theory was it was a good way to get drugs off the street. Well, they only found drugs in 1.2% of all searches. It's not very effective. They actually found drugs more often on the white folks they searched than the black and brown folks they searched. So in other words, the hit rates were better when you stopped white people, but they kept stopping black and brown folks disproportionately. So that's some pretty crime control, right? Tells you that the war on drugs ain't about drugs, right? But actually, we know that, right? Like, I know that because the war on drugs was about drugs. I don't know who'd be giving this talk to you, but sure as hell wouldn't be me. Because I don't think they let you Skype that in from prison. And I can tell you this now because the statute of limitations has expired and they can't touch me, but... Oh, Jesus, don't applaud that. Like, what is that? Like, oh, white privilege, drug use, awesome. I'm going to go get high tonight. Don't applaud that. That's horrible. I mean... It's a laugh line. It's not an applause line. Jesus. Right? But it's true. Right? So 1.2% of the time they found drugs, not a very good anti-drug strategy. The other folks, like the chief of police who brought the program in, said, oh, it's a great way to get guns off the street. Really? Okay, so in the 9 years that were under review in the court case on stop and frisk, they had 4.5 million stops under review over the 9-year period. You know how many guns they found out of 4.5 million stops? They found 4,500 guns. Do the math. It's 1/10 of 1% of the people whom they stopped actually had a gun on them. I could do better at finding guns in New York by just walking down the street and randomly tagging people, right? Just like walking up being like, you got a gun? You'd be like, yeah, I got one right here. I'm sure I could find like at least 0.2 of 1%. Just like flipping a coin, like just randomly pointing people out, paintball, right? That's not a plan. It's not about crime control. It was about black and brown people control, right? That's what this is. So we have an individual who, whether or not he is racist isn't the question. It's about whether or not the policies, the practices, the procedures, the systems that he would put in place would further racism. That's the issue. It isn't about personal stuff, right? It's about systemic stuff. And we need to understand it that way also for the sake of the people that did vote for him, because we got to have two things that happen from here on. We got to have radical honesty, which means we got to call both when it needs to be called, and we got to name things when they are, in fact, fascist and authoritarian and racist and, things of that nature and sexist and all of that. We got to call it what it is.
Read those numbers one more time and ask yourself how any honest person can defend this system. Stop and frisk. 4.5 million stops over 9 years. 88% of the people stopped were black and brown. 94% had not done anything at all. They found drugs 1.2% of the time. And when they did search white people, they found drugs more often. They found guns on 1/10 of 1% of the people they stopped. 4,500 guns out of 4.5 million stops. You could find more guns by flipping a coin on a random New York street corner, and Tim Wise said exactly that. But Trump called this program fantastic, wonderful, the best, because it was never about crime. It was about control. It was about reminding black and brown people in those neighborhoods that your body is not your own, that you can be stopped at any time, searched at any time, humiliated at any time for nothing. And then Wise played the card that should have ended the entire political conversation in America decades ago. The Lee Atwater tape. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is not opinion. This is a senior Republican strategist on audio in 1981 admitting the entire playbook. He said it clearly. You used to be able to say the N-word. By the late 60s, that gets you in trouble. So you start saying states' rights, crime, welfare, taxes, and his exact words. The real purpose is that black people get hurt worse than white people. That tape has been public for over 40 years. The strategy has not changed. The only thing that changed is Trump stopped using the code words. He went from dog whistle to bullhorn. Mexicans are rapists. Ban the Muslims. Inner city carnage. He did not update the playbook. He just stopped hiding it. And the most devastating thing Wise said in this entire segment was not about Trump at all. It was about the Electoral College. The system that put Trump into office was designed as a compromise with slaveholding states. States that counted black human beings as 3/5 of a person to boost their own political power. The racism of the 1700s is not in the past. It is the mechanism that selected the current president. They do not want you to connect those dots. Now you have. Thank you for watching. Like this video, subscribe, and share it. See you in the next one.
All right, so we got a lot more to get to. Be right back with the Rebel Blade.
I worship you, King of the universe. For blessed are you. You made all of creation. So mighty the power in you. You free us from the darkness and change us of perverse. You deliver us from the evil, teaching us verse by verse. When my heart gets weak and my soul feels tired, you bring new life, lift me higher and higher. Every road I walk, every scar and bruise, you stay beside me when I was confused. I was drowning deep in my sin and shame. Still you call me softly by my name. Now I lift my hands with tears in my eyes, 'cause your mercy keeps on changing my life. And I know you never let me go. Even when I ran away, your love still found a road. Jesus, you're the light when the nights get cold. You're the peace in my soul when I lose control. I hear heaven calling, telling me I'm yours. So I praise your name forevermore. You save me, you change me. Your grace came and remade me. King Jesus, my heart is yours, forever yours.
Always marry somebody that's going to trigger for you every unhappiness that you ever had in your childhood. I find them attractive, they're humorous, they're fun to be with. That's important. But underneath it, there's something else. When you marry somebody, you're going to find both your dreams and your worst nightmare. When I talk to couples, I say, I got bad news for you. You always marry somebody that's going to trigger for you every unhappiness that you ever had in your childhood. So when we find somebody to be in a relationship with, it happens on two levels. One level is, I find them attractive, they're humorous, they're fun to be with. There's a commonality, so that there's the attractiveness. That's important. But underneath it, there's something else. Underneath it, there's a looking for the love that we never got in the first place. So, for example, why do so many women, specifically, who were abused in childhood, end up with abusive men? Which they do, repeatedly. You think, what's wrong with them? Well, there's nothing wrong with them. What's wrong is, whose love did they most want when they were kids? Precisely that abusive person. So unconsciously, they'll be drawn towards men who've got that abusive potential. Because that's where they're looking for love. Now, this is generally true. So my wife and I, we've been married 55 years now. And yes, we find each other attractive and fun, and we had a lot to talk about. But on a deep level, I was compensating for the love I didn't get as a child the way I needed it. And so was she. In other words, we married our parents' dysfunctions. And then the relationship becomes either destroyed by that, or you grow mutually. So relationships very much a matter of growing up together, if that can happen. But I guarantee you, when you marry somebody, you're going to find both your dreams and your worst nightmare.
That's profound, that we're all seeking, subconsciously, we're seeking our parents' dysfunction.
Yeah, because that's where we wanted the love. So we're still looking for the love. Now, that's wired into our brains. and it's wired into our bodies. And very often when I speak to people and they're upset about their relationship, and I say, well, what's in your body? And they'll say, well, there's tension, there's, my heart's beating fast, my throat's tight. I say, how familiar is that feeling? Goes way back to childhood.
Wow. So in terms of our unhealthy, should I say, when we have those unhealthy relationships, how does that then manifest itself physically? So whether that be an unhealthy childhood relationship, or even as an adult, if we're in a marriage or we're dating someone and it's unhealthy and we know it is, how does that manifest itself physically?
It'll manifest itself in physical states, such as I described, tension in the body, upsets of the intestines. See, people are relational creatures, and we always think of ourselves as sort of discrete individuals, but like in my marriage, if I can be self-disclosing here, when I was being dishonest, my wife would get a neck pain. Literally.
She would get a neck pain.
So after a while, she learned, I got this neck ache. Are you lying to me right now? And I was, or intestinal upset. We tend to think of it as, this some problem with the individual's intestinal tract. But the intestinal tract is very responsive to relationship, because there's a big nerve called the vagus nerve. They call it the wandering nerve. It's the largest autonomic nerve in the body, and it connects the organs to the brain. And when the brain picks up a hint of disturbance, the vagus will act up, and now you're going to have stomach aches and diarrhea and or constipation even, and so on, because there's something disturbed in the relationship. And the whole point is we're wired together as human beings, and so that'll manifest through our nervous system. So it shows up in the body. Children are very much creatures of relation, and they're very dependent on the parents' emotional states. So if you want to know if a couple is having tensions, there's two things you can do. You can ask the mother and the father, or you can measure the child's stress hormone levels. And the child's stress hormone levels will be a perfect readout of the parents' state of relationship.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that we need to be in touch with how our body is reacting in all of these moments with our partner.
We need to.
Before he finishes, and I'll tell you who this doctor is, I'm going to put on my little hat as well, because it's a thing that I rarely do. I don't believe, I really don't, I'll put it this way. I do not like people who constantly have to brag about their credentials, because I think that arguments from authority are sometimes the weakest argument. But this is kind of what I will say. I am a military veteran. I have degrees from American Military University in psychology. I have stuff in behavioral science from blah, 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 blah. If you want to learn it, you can search me and it'll say exactly where. I have counseling certificates in this, that, and the third. Behavioral psychology, human anatomy, anxiety, addiction. I know when people are lying. And over the years, I have picked up on the fact that it may not be the appropriate way or place to say it. So I will have people that are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s who still have certain behavior traits, and when you start to hear them tell stories, they expose it to you. Something as simple as, I like my mother more than I like my father. And then so they said that to you, and then they over time tell you my father was an alcoholic, or my mother, was an alcoholic, or vice versa. Well, then they just kind of give you the main. You go look at the social scientists say about it, behavioral psychology, and then you watch them. And so you can see they may have these certain behavior traits even at this age, and they will say something like, well, it's worked for me so long, I just won't change. And it's like, that is even though that is an adult that is sitting there, that is a childlike puppy response, where you telling them to do something, they revert right back into, oh no, this is my mom, and the fact that you can call them out on their stuff makes them feel so uncomfortable, because you're triggering them in ways that they had never had to deal with. Imagine if a child had every time a male came around, got abused. So anytime as an adult they hear male whatever, they are gonna do the flight scenario. You will either fight, stay. I think we used to say fight, flight, or fight. But I like to say either you're gonna run, you're gonna stand firm, or you're gonna fight. And so it all is not sometimes about whether somebody's a coward or these are just silly things that people who say that are flippant. That is their trauma response speaking. This is what I've learned as from a very early age how to survive. When this is happening, you stand still, you don't say anything, you don't get involved. Or it may be when this is happening, you stand still, you're there as a third party, so you can witness what happened. You can be the third party mediator. Or it's when this is happening, you stand there so you don't take a stance, whatever. Or it's like when this is happening, you run towards the fight, you get everybody safe. And those are natural responses. The person that is running is just as brave as the person that is standing, who is just as brave as the person that is running towards it. I think a lot of times we like to play this game hero coward, and that's not always the choice of the person you happen to be seeing. You can give somebody as much training as possible, but if you are not a coach who also somewhat knows some type of behavioral psychology, it may not work out for you. Luckily for me, or I'll just say I was very blessed that in my military capacity, I was also a field training officer. I was a watch commander. I taught people how to shoot. So my military experience prepared me for my social science experience, my behavioral psychology stuff. I would have chiefs try to yell at you, stuff like that. Then you kind of, you say stuff like "feel better," and you could see the reaction they made because one, it did make them feel better, but two, you were gonna get it because you knew too much. And so that is a lot. Even though that moment wasn't great when it was happening, it did teach me about human beings. And I'll say this. The thing about human beings that we need to really, I want people to, if I can get you to remember everything about this, what's your most intimate thing, your most intimate fear is the same most intimate fear another human being probably has. What's most personal and sacred is universal. I'm going to let you get back to this, doctor.
Be aware. We get to be aware. And the more body awareness we have and realizing that our bodies are responsive to the environment, the more of a clear map we have to our relationship. Okay. The Western medicine that I'm trained in tends to separate the mind from the body. Women might go to, or men for that matter, might go to a physician with certain physical symptoms, and the doctors will look for the source only within the body itself, whereas very often the source is interactional and relational.
Now, correct me on this.
Yeah.
Because I've always said who we choose as our partner is one of the most important decisions.
There's so much more to it that is unconscious. And then in any successful relationship, the task of the relationship is to make that unconscious conscious. Because what we all want is freedom, but there's no freedom without awareness. So if I'm unaware of all these things that are motivating me, how can I talk about being free?
You do believe that's true, then? Who we choose as a partner is one of the most important decisions of our life?
Well, it's the most important decision, and again, it's the one that we're very often the least conscious of all the factors that go in.
And the voice of the doctor you heard was Dr. George Mate. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. He has some amazing work, a lot of very good deep thinker about mindset, especially if it's around how you feel. I would highly recommend his work. Again, that is Dr. Gaber Mate.
They look at So we wanted to take a bit of a look at what is going on in North Korea, and there are a number of reasons to do this. So first of all, let's put C3 up on the screen. Xi Jinping actually visited North Korea on Monday. This was a very significant visit. It's been quite a while since the Chinese leader has traveled to North Korea, and comes at a pivotal moment for obviously both China, but also for North Korea. Led to several articles in major newspapers about what exactly is going on in that country. A lot of American or Western viewers, they are economically doing quite well at the moment. So we can put C1 up on the screen. This was an article from the Wall Street Journal about the world's most surprising economic success story in North Korea. Effectively, what they lay out here is how the country was really struggling under the dueling challenges of COVID and also U.S. sanctions, of course, which are, fairly devastating to the economy. And during COVID, they instituted a severe lockdown, really closed the borders. There was limited ability to get media in and know what's going on. There were some dissidents who left and were able to sort of tell the world about of smuggled in goods as they look to transition the country to really focusing on and requiring that all goods that were sold internally would be through state sanctioned channels. Now, of course, in the immediate term, that caused a lot of hardship. But now what North Korea has done is they have partnered up with, they've long, had this partnership with China, and China continues to be sort of their most important ally and, providing them with a lot of trade goods and also aid. But they have now this very important partnership with Russia. They saw that there was a huge opportunity with Russia's war in Ukraine. And they not only sent troops as mercenaries to go and fight for Russia, many of whom died, but the state received payment for the fact that they sent these troops over on behalf of Russia. But they also have become very important to that war effort. They've taken that money that they've made through their partnership with Russia, and they have plowed that back into their own economy through major construction projects, through building out factories, not just in Pyongyang, but throughout the countryside that was much less developed. And apparently this whole direction saga is really bearing a lot of fruits. And over the past several years, GDP growth has been quite strong. It's still a country that suffers with a lot of poverty and also inequality between the leadership and between everybody else. But there are much more wealth going around, much more economic prosperity, and the ability to build out these resorts and other projects that bring a quality of life improvement to the population as well.
Yeah, I think the most fascinating part of the whole story, which belies everything, is the inability of the United States to continue to enforce serious global sanctions. Because the story of North Korea, which effectively economically was crushed both by the United States and the rest of the world, all up until they're obtaining a nuclear weapon. Even then, after they obtained a full-blown ICBM nuclear weapon capable of hitting the United States, they still were not prosperous, or even relatively prosperous, or in some sort of an upward trajectory. Russia enters the war in Ukraine. The United States and the West throws everything we have at the Russian economy. The Russian economy continues to thrive. The Chinese banking system, the Russian banking system, all of these circumventing actions and infrastructure is created. Then North Korea, because as one of the largest standing armies in the world and weapons production, because that's what their entire focus was on, is able to both use its people and send weapons, manufacturing, all these other things over to Russia, which then they're obviously paid for. So now they go from being a Chinese vassal state to actually having something that another country wants, Russia, of who it has some reasonable relations. And in the meantime, China is also able to not only backstop their economy, but they're also able to bring in some goods and actually purchase some other types of goods and bootstrap some other industry inside of the country. The single most interesting part of the Wall Street Journal story is about housing, about how Pyongyang and North Korea has been able to build more new housing in a few year period than Los Angeles and Chicago, just to demonstrate, by the way, what you can do if you want to do it, if you have the will to build, as they say. And so
they're abundance pilled over there.
Yeah.
Get your heart out, Mr. Klein.
Right. And this is the country which, for years they said even had declining population because of malnutrition and famine and poverty. And when they have a little bit of money, they build. They're saying on the streets of North Korea, you're seeing BMWs, BYD, Chinese vehicles. But I think that the dual story of both Russia and China able to prop up their economy and actually make it not entirely miserable and fake in terms of the way that everybody remembers the Vice guide to North Korea that came out in 2006, 2007. I remember watching it when I was, that was genuinely creepy. This is under Kim Jong-il. This is, fake hotels, no guests. That's just not the case anymore. I mean, we have some of these images that are coming out of Pyongyang. And I mean, look, not the Pyongyang that we remember from the propaganda reels and others, even with the tightly controlled propaganda that they had on North Korea. It is pretty obvious that there has been a major increase in the quality of life on the street. And that is in no way diminishing the malnutrition, the starvation, and all of the other insanity that goes on inside of North Korea. But I just think it's actually a major story of U.S. sanctions. And something I emphasize here on the show all the time is if you have guns and if you have bullets, and if you have oil, or in this case, you can sell bullets for oil or some sort of energy, you can survive a lot, actually. And nuclear weapons, obviously, on top of that. If you have those three, or two out of those three, you're going to be at least somebody to be reckoned with. And Kim Jong-un, the only way he's going out is if he dies of obesity-related disease. No U.S. aircraft carrier Delta Force team is going into North Korea to go and kidnap him. He's going to die in his own bed whenever he wants to. And that is the singular... Look, it shows the singular vision of obtaining a nuclear weapon, of being willing to starve your own people, to destroy your own economy if you must. But in the long run, it will be the most important decision that they ever made, which is sending a very strong strategic signal to the rest of the world. That's why I think the Iran situation and Venezuela combined are actually going to prove the North Korean model out, as well as the Ukraine situation in terms of throwing all those sanctions, and it's just not working.
Yeah. And the partnership with Russia has obviously, it's provided them with a lot of money so that they can invest in housing, in infrastructure, in factories, in even, like resorts and, leisure activities for their people. But it also has provided them with the ability to build out their military and, for Russian technology to help them shore up some of the places where they were more vulnerable and less developed. I want to read a little bit of this Wall Street Journal piece to people because
there's a term, I forget it. Is this socialism that they're engaged in? Or is it communism? Or is it a Marxism? Or what are those fancy terms that we run all the time? Every time somebody talks about community, oneness, helping each other. I don't know. I forgot. Capitalism forever.
Just for a lot of Americans, this is kind of mind-blowing stuff. So they talk about this Australian tour operator who visits North Korea regularly. And it says after more than 100 visits to North Korea, Rowan Beard had come to expect long waits for a taxi under the Kim Jong-un regime. But on a recent visit to Pyongyang, his first in years, a vehicle arrived in minutes. His North Korean interpreter had whipped out a smartphone, opened an app called Samsung, and hailed a ride with a service akin to Uber. The two tracked the taxi's movements in real time. This was all totally new, said Beard, an Australian tour operator. My mind was blown. It goes on to say that in Pyongyang, restaurants serve up brick oven pizza and chicken wings. Diners can pay through a mobile QR code system. Chinese electric vehicles whiz through the streets. Pyongyang has new pet stores, an internet gaming cafe, and car dealerships selling BMWs. Kim has initiated a nationwide construction boom. Last year, and this is what you're referring to, Sagar, North Korea built 10,000 new homes in Pyongyang, more than either LA or Chicago. As I mentioned before, he's also had a focus outside of Pyongyang, building out as well, trying to alleviate some of the disparity between the city and the countryside. And we can put up, you can see by satellite, this is one of the ways, since it's, such a reclusive government and very difficult for foreigners to gain access, for Westerners to gain access. We can put C1B up on the screen. You can see the differences in the light map from 2019 to 2025. So you can see that there's been, massive development, also just, more reliable electricity in order for lights to be lit and, to be able to get these satellite images. So this is one of the key markers that has long been used to track like how things are going in sort of side of North Korea. And according to this, they are going much better than they were in the past. New York Times had a similar report. I can put C2 up on the screen, tracking the country's development over the past number of years. They spend a lot of time in this piece, which is important as well, talking about the extreme crackdown during COVID, both, locking the borders and also really cracking down on any sort of dissent, any sort of distribution of foreign media, including like K-pop or any sort of like South Korean dramas. If any of that was met with execution. So heavy crackdown on that and on the on the black markets there that a lot of people were reliant on and just to be able to live. So it was, by all reports, a very difficult time. And the policies were extremely authoritarian. But now here, and not to say the policies aren't still authoritarian, but in terms of the economic life of the country, things seem to have dramatically improved. And so now as Xi visits North Korea, they're a little bit worried about North Korea becoming too close to Russia and sort of forgetting about their benefactors over in China, because North Korea is important for China in terms of their geostrategic interests of balancing on the Korean peninsula. So, this is probably the first time that the Chinese leader, and a North Korean leader visit in this manner for many years, where the North Korean leader really has some leverage here in terms of the type of deals that they could strike. By all reports too, Sagar, Trump has wanted to do another meeting with Kim Jong-un and try to, revisit the nuclear issue. And they're like, no, we're good.
Yeah, they don't care.
No,
exactly.
thanks. We're not interested.
It really does show the power of what a nuclear weapon can give you. I think the story is fast. Look, it's sad too, because, a lot of people died. And it's like, we're not trying to wash over. We're talking about a country where they execute you for listening to K-pop, right? And they have all kinds of insane internal repression whenever they want to, and have now for decades, basically an entire systematized like gulag type system. But it does really, I think, just show the diminishing power of U.S. sanctions and of U.S. power. And it also, with China and Russia, they're able, or now not feuding, but both trying to bolster their status there with North Korea. It's turned itself into a real power with the ability to exchange not just goods with China, its original kind of client state, but actually have some leverage. And of course, it poses a huge threat to our own ally, South Korea. So it is remains a very, very important geopolitical part of the globe. And to watch this happen over 5 years just shows how quickly the world has changed. An unimaginable story even 10 years ago. Absolutely unimaginable to talk about the streets of Pyongyang in this way. And now here we are. It's crazy.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.
So just imagine how wild that is. While we are focusing on what somebody's sexuality is, so stuff that's nobody's damn business. We're focused on whether somebody's transgender or not. It's something that's nobody's damn business. We're focusing on trans athletes, something that's less than 0.something% of the population. These countries are focused on real issues. We're obsessed with cultural issues. And I'm not trying to say that they're perfect, but they have a long-term strategy, and we have a election 2-year term, what happens in the next 8-year strategy. I'm not trying to romanticize the dictators, but I want you to think about this. We think that these people are dictators because they only let one person run the country. But what do you think I feel when the only option that I have are Democrats and Republicans? Oh, we're much better because we have two people run. That we all know the system is rigged. Well, that's why I tell people I'm not tribal. I'm a man without an island. The political philosophy that I believe in, anarcho-syndicalism, is never going to happen. So it's not even worth talking about sometimes. But anyway, we're going to have our Blacksmith's Intellectual Pass. And then thank you for tuning in, and we will see you on the next episode.
I want to discuss the race problem tonight, and I want to discuss it very honestly. I still believe that freedom is the bonus you receive for telling the truth. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. And I do not see how we will ever solve the turbulent problem of race confronting our nation until there is an honest confrontation with it and a willingness to admit the truth when we discover it. And so I use as a title, The Other America, because there are literally two Americas. One America is beautiful for situation. In this America, millions of people have the milk of prosperity and the honey of equality flowing before them. Children grow up in the sunlight of opportunity. But there is another America. This other America has a daily ugliness about it that transforms the buoyancy of hope into the fatigue of despair. In this other America, men walk the streets in search for jobs that do not exist. Millions live in substandard housing, where they end up with wall-to-wall rats and roaches. Thousands of young people are deprived of an adequate education, not because they lack intelligence, but because the schools are overcrowded, inadequate, and segregated. And the most critical problem is the economic problem. There are millions of people working every day and still living in poverty. They receive part-time wages for full-time work. And so the Negro finds himself perishing on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. This has caused bitterness, despair, and we have seen the angered expressions of this despair in violent rebellions. And I must say tonight that a riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. It has failed to hear that large segments of society are more concerned about tranquility than about justice. And so we must face the fact that our nation's summers of unrest are caused by our nation's winters of delay. As long as justice is postponed, we stand on the verge of social disruption. The first thing that must be recognized is that America is still a racist country. However unpleasant that sounds, it is the truth. Racism is the notion that the very being of a people is inferior, and its ultimate logic is genocide. And until this is removed, there will be people walking through life feeling that they are nobody. Now there is another myth, the myth of time. It is the notion that only time can solve the problem of racial injustice. But time is neutral. It can be used either constructively or destructively. Human progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts of dedicated individuals. And so we must come to see that the time is always right to do right. There is another myth, that legislation cannot solve the problem. It may be true that the law cannot change the heart, but it can restrain the heartless. It may not make a man love me, but it can restrain him from lynching me, and that is important. And when you change the habits of men, attitudes begin to change. That is why justice requires both legislation and conscience. Now there is another illusion. The idea that people can lift themselves entirely by their own bootstraps. No other group has been enslaved for centuries and then freed without resources, without land, without opportunity. It is like releasing a man from prison and giving him no way to begin again. And yet at the same time, this nation gave land, resources, and support to others. That is a contradiction that cannot be ignored. So we must reorder our national priorities. We cannot spend billions on destruction while neglecting the needs of justice at home. Justice is indivisible. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We must come to see that our destinies are tied together. We must learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. By working with determination, by sharing power, by confronting truth.
One of the witnesses to the massacre from the Homeland Security Chief. So what can he do to help make our kids safer? From the California Fire Response.
We need to do is to be able to let the helicopters get out.
The whole needs to be self-evident that all men are created.
Watching and waiting, convinced this world's never changing. Teenagers popping their pistols, killing, dealing, and stealing the joy away from their parents who brought them up to be teachers and preachers, reaching for something, coming up empty-handed. Goddamn, his family still standing, but y'all still sitting on your hands, asking when will we become free? Never, 'cause we've got bridges burning between uptown and downtown. Someone come and rescue me. She said, I'm one colors and colors. They wonder why all the hatred. I'm breaking barriers while some of y'all still sitting on your hands, asking when will we become free? Never, 'cause we've got bridges burning between uptown and downtown. Someone come and rescue me. She said I'm wanted, dead or alive in my hometown. Someone come and save these streets, 'cause we've got bridges burning between uptown and downtown. Someone come and rescue me. She said I'm wanted, dead or alive in my hometown. Someone come and save these streets.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Of course, if you want to support the show, you can do so by going to www.patreon.com and getting a membership for as little as $3 a month. Again, that's www.patreon.com/The Jerome McClain Show. The Jerome McClain Show is fully listener-supported, independent media that won't lead you to tribalism. Get a membership and support independent media at www.patreon.com/The Jerome McClain Show.